Chapter 2. Controlled Chaos. South China Sea. Chinese aircraft carrier Liao Ning. Lieutenant Thomas Cade left the briefing room with a hollow feeling in his chest. The weight of the situation pressed down on him with every step he took through the ship's steel corridors. The sun is dying, the world is falling apart, and I just got drafted into a global war over an alien microbe. He had expected his new assignment to be strange. Nothing about an American Marine being stationed on a repurposed Chinese aircraft carrier under the direct command of an unelected Dutch scientist was normal, but this was beyond anything he could have imagined. His boots clanked against the floor as he stepped onto the flight deck. A warm ocean breeze washed over him, but it did nothing to shake the feeling that the world had just changed forever. He had seen war before, he had lost men before, but this wasn't war. This was something else entirely. The first deployment. Cade's team assembled in one of the carrier's converted hangar bays, now repurposed into a joint military command center. The room was filled with American, Chinese, Russian, and European soldiers, an impossible alliance of nations, all gathered under one roof to fight a war no one wanted to admit was happening. Cade stood at the front, eyeing the diverse mix of uniforms. A few of the Chinese Marines glanced at him with skepticism. The PLA wasn't exactly known for playing well with outsiders, especially not Americans. But Cade had worked with enough joint operations to know that respect was earned in the field, not in a briefing room. "All right," Cade began, keeping his voice level. "You've all been selected for this task force because you can follow orders and think on your feet. That's good, because from here on out, you are under my command." A few murmurs passed through the group, but no one outright challenged him. "Good enough for now. Our first mission is in Jakarta. Intelligence suggests a black market deal is going down. Someone's selling astrophage samples, and we don't know who the buyer is. Our job is to shut it down." He clicked a remote, bringing up a satellite image on the projector. Location: a private shipping yard owned by an Indonesian security firm with a history of smuggling weapons. We're dealing with professionals. Expect resistance. He let that sink in before continuing. "This is a non-negotiable op," Cade said. "We take the astrophage, we capture the buyers and sellers, and we leave. If they resist, we put them down. If they run, we make sure they don't get far." Silence. Then a voice spoke up from the back. "Sir," a Russian soldier said, his accent thick, "what happens if we don't stop them in time?" Cade met his gaze. "Then we have a rogue state, a terrorist group, or some billionaire psychopath running around with the most powerful energy source in history," he said, "and we all know what happens next." No one needed him to explain. If nuclear weapons had given world powers the ability to end the world, then astrophage had just given every back-alley warlord the ability to end a city. And that was why they had to move? Jakarta, Smuggler's Yard. The Black Hawk touched down a mile from the compound, kicking up a cloud of dust as Cade and his strike team disembarked. They moved fast and low, hugging the shadows as they approached the perimeter. Through his night vision optics, Cade could see the guard patrols, well-armed, lightly armored. Private security, but disciplined, not amateurs. Cade motioned to his second-in-command, Sergeant Liu, a Chinese Marine who had been hand-picked for this unit. "Two-man patrols, moving in a loop," Cade whispered. "They'll cross paths in..." Liu nodded. "We take them quietly." Cade gave the signal. Liu and another operative disappeared into the dark. Seconds later, two muffled thuds broke the silence. The bodies were dragged into cover before they could be discovered. Smooth. Cade signaled the rest of the team forward. Inside the compound. They reached the warehouse without issue. Too easy. Cade's gut told him something was off, but there was no time to hesitate. He motioned for Sergeant Vasquez, a veteran from the U.S. Rangers, to breach the door. Vasquez nodded and placed a small charge against the lock. Boom. The door swung open and Cade's team stormed in. Inside, a dozen men were gathered around a metal crate. Weapons were drawn instantly. "Drop it," Cade barked. Most complied. Most. One man in the back, a wiry figure with a gas mask and a detonator in hand, didn't. Cade's blood ran cold. "Don't do it," he warned, leveling his rifle. The man didn't speak. He just smiled beneath his mask. Then he pressed the detonator. The astrophage bomb. Cade barely had time to shout before the world exploded in white light. He felt his skin burn in an instant, like standing too close to a furnace. His vision blinded. His eardrums burst. The shockwave hit like a freight train, flipping him through the air, smashing him into the wall. For a terrifying moment there was nothing but silence. Then, as his hearing barely began to return, he heard the screams. The entire warehouse was on fire. Cade coughed, struggling to push himself up. He blinked through the pain, his vision swimming. Several of his men were down. Some weren't moving. But the smuggler was still alive. He was standing at the far end of the warehouse, laughing. "Do you understand now?" the man shouted, his voice hoarse. "You can't stop it. You can't stop what's coming." Cade raised his rifle, ignoring the agony in his burned arms. "Watch me." And then he pulled the trigger. Aftermath. They lost 5 men in the raid. Sergeant Vasquez was among them. The astrophage bomb had been a small one, but even a small one was devastating. The enemy hadn't been warlords or rogue governments. They had been terrorists. And this had only been a test? Back on the Liaoning, Cade stood before Strat, still covered in burns and Vasquez's blood. She didn't ask how he felt. She didn't offer condolences. She simply said, "We have bigger problems." Cade clenched his fists. Bigger than what just happened? Strat pulled up a satellite image. A second black market deal had just gone down. And this time the buyers weren't terrorists. They were military. The First Nation state had just acquired astrophage weapons. And just like that, the next war had begun.